So, I've been asked to talk to you about the OpenDaylight hydrogen release, which will be coming up shortly. And in looking into doing that, it occurred to me that it might be useful to talk a little bit more broadly, because there are certain things that some of you may be more familiar with or less familiar with. So what I'm planning on doing in this talk is going through sort of briefly what is SDN, talking about what OpenDaylight is, who's involved, and then go into hydrogen and the simultaneous release plan for it, the projects, basically the things that we're going to be releasing, and the proposed release vehicles, the things that are going to be on the download page when you go to actually download OpenDaylight. So, what is SDN? Almost everybody has some notion of what they think SDN is, but a lot of the time it's like the blind man in the elephant. Networking is an incredibly diverse problem space, and everyone has a set of problems that they would like to solve. And so depending on where you are and the things that are causing you pain, you will have sort of a different view of what SDN is. So, in general, SDN, software-defined networking, it ends up being many things to many people. So it can be network virtualization in the cloud, which probably vexes a lot of you guys. It can be dynamic service chains for subscribers and a service provider. It can be dynamic traffic engineering in a backbone network. It can be dynamic configuration of a network in order to allow you to operationally work more effectively. It can be network function virtualization, and there are a whole host of other use cases. It is mind-blowing how diverse the network domain is. But there are some commonalities. So everyone, when they talk about SDN, so far my experience, means bringing programmability to the network, radically increasing flexibility, and moving from configuration timescales to software timescales. So how many folks in the room have ever been told by a NetOps guy to go open a ticket and wait 4 days to get something done in your network? Can I get a show of hands? And how is that working for you? It's a fundamentally different thing to have a piece of software that expects the system to respond fairly instantaneously to your requests than to deal with the way we traditionally provision networks. So there are lots of ideas about how people would like to see SDN approach. And to be completely honest and frank, people are still figuring it out. Everyone is. And so evolvability is a key aspect of proceeding. There are lots of ways to skin this cat. You want to be able to bring the right tool to the right part of the problem. And so you need a general evolvable platform that recognizes the diversities of the needs and the approaches to SDN. Which brings us to OpenDaylight. So OpenDaylight is a community that is building an evolvable SDN platform that's capable of handling these diverse use cases and approaches. It's working on building common abstractions of capabilities northbound that people can program to. So rather than writing your SDN applications in a way that binds you tightly to whatever the implementation strategy du jour is, that you actually can address the real capabilities that you'd like to work with. It provides intermediation of those capabilities to multiple southbound implementations, so that as your underlying network evolves, or as better solutions emerge, you can take advantage of them without having to rewrite all of your SDN applications. It provides programmable network services, network applications, and whatever the hell else we need to make it all work. So that is, in a nutshell, what we're looking at with OpenDaylight. This is a nice, simple picture that gives you some notion of the architecture. At the bottom, there are network elements. Above that, you have southbound interfaces and protocols that allow you to talk to those network elements with OpenFlow or other protocols. You have a service abstraction layer that abstracts those things to generic capabilities. So rather than programming in the nitty-gritty, for example, of OpenFlow, you would program flows, and whatever it is that can fulfill the flow programming southbound for you is what gets used. Above that, you have common network service functions, platform services, extensions to the controller, all of which will then expose REST APIs north, where applications, orchestration systems, other services can program the controller. So this sort of gets to the who is OpenDaylight. So this is the slide that everyone shows when they talk about who OpenDaylight is, because there's this general obsession with sort of the corporate players, and we have rather a lot of them floating around. This is the corporate view of who OpenDaylight is. This is the view I actually prefer. So when you talk about who is OpenDaylight, basically it's an open source project. And what's true of almost every open source project you encounter is it primarily consists of the people who show up to do the work. And in the case of OpenDaylight, we currently have commits from over 70 contributors from many different organizations, including unaffiliated individuals. When I wrote this slide, we were running about 100 commits per week and accelerating. I think we had something like 40 Garrett changes coming this morning, so that's going to go up this week, I suspect. And then we have a strong integration and testing community that's coming up to make sure that all the work that's being done comes together as a coherent, functioning, cleanly tested whole. So this brings you to the question of what are we delivering? So OpenDaylight is multi-project, which means that we have different distinct projects, different sub-communities with OpenDaylight, working on the particular things that they're interested in. We currently have 12 projects. My expectation is, and again this has has to go to the TSC, that we have 2 project proposals that I expect to be coming to creation review in the next week or so. So that number is also growing. But you want to also deliver a coherent thing at the end of the day. It's very functional to have many projects. It allows all kinds of innovation to occur. But you need some mechanism to allow everybody to flock together to form this coherent whole. And for us, this mechanism is the simultaneous release, which is to say, we will come together as a community, we will agree on certain milestones that we will hit together towards a particular delivery date, and a set of delivery vehicles that we'll provide. So the code name for this release is Hydrogen. Our trademark attorneys have basically told us that if you would like to use a name that is not going to cause trademark troubles, you're pretty much stuck with elements. So we're going with Fusion Products. And our due date is December 9th, 2013. That's when Hydrogen will be released. So I mentioned a little bit the simultaneous release plan, and I'm not going to spend too much time getting into the nitty-gritty, but effectively the simultaneous release plan is something that the projects in OpenDaylight can choose to sign up with, saying that they intend to be part of this coherent whole, and agreeing to meet certain additional requirements in terms of timing, quality, and other milestones to get there. Things like participation in the continuous integration test process, API freezes by particular dates, code freezes, etc., so that we actually can come across the finish line together as a community. So I'm going to talk briefly about the projects that are in the simultaneous release. I may go through some of these quickly because there are a lot of them, and they become more interesting when we get to the end where we have a big picture that brings all the pieces together. So this is the sort of omnibus list, and I will walk through some slides briefly that talk about each one in turn. So at the core you have the controller. This was originally contributed by Cisco. It has many different components, the software abstraction layer, there's a GUI, various network services like topology management and statistics management. There's HAN clustering, etc. You'll note I've got a link in here for each of them. Every project has its own release plan that has to line up in milestones with the simultaneous release, and that informs every other project what it expects to have done and when, so that we can flock together effectively as a community. This is just a picture that shows you the basic structure. It should look familiar. It's the picture I showed earlier. VTN, Virtual Tenant Network, is being contributed by NEC, and it virtualizes networks for multiple tenants, has a vBridge and a vRouter concept, and you'll be hearing a lot more detail about this in the subsequent presentation. And there's a brief picture again, as I said, you'll see this going by in greater detail shortly. OpenDove has been contributed by IBM. It also virtualizes networking, but using a somewhat different approach, using VXLAN. And again, you'll be hearing more about this subsequently. And then we get the affinity management services. So there were some questions during the panel about people who are wanting to do higher level, more semantic kinds of things with their network programming, rather than getting down to the nitty-gritty of the particular protocols and the matches and the actions and all the rest of that. Affinity management provides services for handling metadata of this sort. So you can have applications that treat your traffic not in terms of the particular headers that you have, but in terms of the particular characteristics that you've assigned semantically to it. And they have a very basic model that allows you to effectively say, I've got certain kinds of traffic, I pull them together in groups, there are relationships between the groups, and I'd like to apply attributes to those relationships, so that if, for example, I have a group for my web tier, servers, and a group for my database tier servers that I can apply some attributes to how I would like the traffic between them to be treated. And this is the picture showing where they fit into the overall architecture. They're simply an extension that plugs into the controller. The Lisp mapping service is being contributed by ContextStream with a little bit of participation by Cisco. I don't know how many folks in the room are familiar with not the functional programming language Lisp, but rather with the location-independent, separation of location and network location network protocol Lisp. This is another way to approach the problem of dynamic overlays. And it will provide functionality to allow association of users to flows, to chain service flows through network services, etc. And this shows basically how this fits into OpenDaylight. On the southbound, Lisp has its own notion of a mapping protocol that it talks to routers that understand Lisp. So there is a new southbound protocol here beyond OpenFlow. There's also a Lisp service that handles the management of the Lisp mappings between IP addresses that represent the identifier for a node versus IP addresses that represent the location of it in the network. I'll go really quickly through Yang tools. This is essentially an enabling project at OpenDaylight. We're doing a lot of interesting things to enhance the evolvability of OpenDaylight using models, and particularly using Yang models. And so this is a tool chain that allows you to transform Yang models into working Java code that actually runs and does things in the controller. We have a contribution from Radware called Defense for All, which is providing Ddos protection. It effectively provides a pluggable architecture designed to allow for detection of attacks and then mitigation strategies, so that you can not only use the detection and mitigation strategies that come with OpenDaylight, but you or your vendors can also plug in additional detection and mitigation strategies that allow you to better protect your network. And Defense for All basically fits in as a set of extensions to the controller platform and an application that rides above it. We have a project for BGPLS PSAP, which is yet another way of programming your network. It's being contributed by Cisco. It provides support for discovering your topology via BGPLS, and then for programming pass through it using Path Computation Engine protocol. We have a basic protocol stack for OpenFlow 1.0, 1.3, plus. Have to see how far we get and how far the standards guys get. And this allows not only support for these OpenFlow protocols, but provides mechanisms to allow you as someone who is extending OpenDaylight to bring your own extension actions or matches sort of in from the side, rather than having to bring patches and change the OpenDaylight protocol library directly. You can bring additional OSGI bundles that plug in that provide the extensions you're looking for.
Quick question.
Yes.
So it seems that for most of the projects, I require a different data plane device. For OpenFlow, I require OpenFlow switch. For Lisp, IP router understands Lisp. For mitigation, Defense for All, mitigation devices. So where is this line?
So you don't require. You're actually inverting the problem. It's a matter of the capabilities that are available to you. Because different devices have different capabilities in terms of what they can do. Some of those capabilities are genericizable northbound. Obviously, you cannot do with a network what a network does not have the capability of doing. But it's not a matter of requiring a particular device. It's a matter of providing a capability in a southbound plugin that allows a particular network device that knows how to talk in a particular way to provide that capability to you. So it is not about attaching you to OpenFlow, for example. It's about freeing you from any particular protocol you may be using if there's an alternate way to get that capability.
Okay.
Did I answer your question?
To some extent, yes.
Okay. So we also have a project with the Southbound plugin. This is a joint effort between IBM, Ericsson, and Cisco that handles that intermediation between OpenFlow and, for example, the generic flow programming capabilities that you would program to as an application. We have a Southbound plugin for OVSDB, so that when you come in to configure things from a network configuration point of view through the controller, if one of the things that you have on your southbound side speaks OVSDB, that will be something that will be addressable. This was actually being contributed by individuals at the University of Kentucky. And they have a basic picture of using OpenDaylight as an OVSDB client. And then we have a project from ITRI, SNMP for SDN, where they'd like to be able to also have these same sorts of programmability things that you do in your application on the northbound side, if the capabilities that you have available southbound are just SNMP, to have some of those capabilities available as well. And they, again, fit in as a southbound plugin, and they have some extensions to the SAL in terms of the kinds of things they'd like to expose. I did want to talk briefly about OpenStack integration, because we actually had some exciting developments in our Hackfest last week about how we were going to do OpenStack integration as a community. Effectively, what we're looking at doing is providing a simple OpenStack service that exposes exactly the API that Neutron expects. So when you have Neutron come in with a Neutron plugin in OpenStack, it's basically a simple pass-through. Then below that, you have different providers within the controller that actually provide that. So for example, VTN has a notion of virtualizing networks. OpenDub has a notion of virtualizing networks. They're going to be applicable depending on the underlying capabilities of your network. Whether you need VXLAN because you don't have OpenFlow throughout your data center, or if you decide you would like to use OpenFlow throughout your data center in order to control things. That shouldn't be the concern of people having to provision your OpenStack. They just want their virtual networks. So this is the problem that we solve inside the controller by having different providers available depending on what the network operations people have deployed in their network. So this is the big, beautiful picture for the hydrogen release with all the many components and pieces and parts and how they fit together in layers. It's a little more comprehensible than simply walking through the projects. And it gives you a notion of the breadth of capability that is actually coming from OpenDaylight. We have proposed hydrogen release vehicles because we, as I mentioned before, the breadth of the networking domain is kind of mind-blowing. And the kinds of things that you would want, for example, to virtualize your cloud may not be the same sets of things that you would want to provision past for your subscribers in a cell phone network, for example. So the current proposals are to have a base edition, a virtualization edition, and a service provider edition. The base edition would consist of the basic building blocks that someone who would like to build something on top of or out of OpenDaylight would use to do so. So your basic services, the service abstraction layer, baseline protocols, those sorts of things. The virtualization edition adds to that the VTN coordinator, Ddos Protection as an application, the OpenStack Neutron plugin for OpenStack. It adds the Affinity service, the OpenStack service, VTN and Dub Manager, and also OVSDB southbound support. The Service Provider Edition also brings along the DDoS protection application, Affinity services, the Lisp service, and brings the southbound protocols additionally, SNMP, BGP, PSAP, and Lisp.
So can you clarify the BGP part? What are
BGPLS.
Oh, BGPLS only.
Yeah, topology discovery. And thank you, I'll be a little more specific in this slide.
What means service provider?
So the intent is to provide this, so by service provider, you're talking primarily about people who are operating backbone networks, cellular service providers, cable service providers, people who are primarily interested in moving a lot of traffic from place to place. So the basic call to action here is that OpenDaylight is open to everyone, not just corporate members. As you saw, we have projects that have been brought by companies large and small. We have projects that have been brought by individuals. Everybody can participate. Anybody can push a patch. It's a very open community. So join the mailing lists. We have good mailing lists. There are active discussions going on there about the direction, the kinds of things that we need to do. Join the IRC channel. We've got a very active IRC channel. Bring patches. We take patches from all over the place. Any good patch can come in. You can push it up to Garrett and get reviewed. Bring project proposals. As I said, we have a number of projects. We have more projects coming in all the time. And download and kick the tires. It's a pretty accessible project to download, get up, and get started. There's pretty decent documentation for doing that on the wiki. And then some additional resources. We have wikis in the unusual places, you know, the expected IRC channel in Freenode, mailing lists in this expected place, etc. So are there questions? Yes?
When you talked about your service editions, it wasn't clear to me, are those augmenting so that eventually you wind up with a unified edition that has everything, or are they segmented so that each one has...
So they're all based on the base edition,
yeah.
But you get some bifurcation in terms of flavors that people have. In terms of the ability to assemble a particular set of capabilities that you would like, OpenDaylight itself is built out of OSGI bundles, so everything is a plugin. So in fact, if someone would like to put the work into building a particular arrangement of OpenDaylight plugins for some particular purpose, that's a very doable thing. And I expect, quite honestly, that you will see vendors who will do that. Yes?
You mentioned multiple projects that are kind of operating separately but then converge in a single release. Are you doing anything to have those projects converge to using the same libraries or the same common language?
Yes. So the basic infrastructure for most of these things is OSGI on the JVM. So, which doesn't necessarily mean Java. We actually have some pieces right now that are written in Python. We've had people blog about writing extensions in Scala, but they mostly come in as OSGI pieces. In terms of converging on things like, for example, common libraries, the big piece for that is talk to each other. So we just had a conversation about which version of netting we would all like to converge on, as an example, to handle asynchronous communication, because a brief look through showed that we had 4 different versions going on in different Southbound plugins, and that didn't seem like a good idea to us. So there's a lot of active conversation that goes on around these pieces to make sure that we get a coherent whole. But open source is really about a flocking behavior. It's not about a top-down command and control architecture. Yes?
Is there a common software architecture that people are designing to in terms of, multi-threaded, what that database looks like?
So it's multi-threaded. We have an underlying clustering services that provides data storage services. It's divided up into an API bundle and an implementation bundle, because that way, number one, if we decide that we would like to change implementations, we can. And number two, if someone decides they don't like the implementation choice, they can always sub it a different implementation. So you do get commonality coming in around those pieces architecturally, but that emerges from 2 things: the conversations that happen in the community and people actually doing the work. Because at the end of the day, somebody has to write the code.
So is the wiki the right place to start in terms of understanding what that looks like?
The wiki would be a good place to start. There's a fair amount of stuff there about the general architecture and the direction it's going and those sorts of things. But if you come up with questions that you don't feel are being answered, if you want to know additional things, because no one is perfect in their documentation, email the discuss alias at OpenDaylight, which is the general cross-project mailing list, and people respond pretty promptly. Or ping the IRC channel. Get a lot of response there too. Yes?
Is there a sense for what OpenDaylight, what the effect is going to be on the network admins that support this stuff today? Is that being taken into consideration at all? And what should they do to start becoming familiar with the platform and infrastructure?
So, I'll speak a little bit from my personal point of view on that, because there's not necessarily a total consensus on that. So from my point of view, I tend to see DevOps people, and you desperately need more agility in what you're doing in DevOps. You need to be able to move pieces of the network around. On the other side, you've got NetOps guys, and they're going to be killed if the network goes down. And it's really scary when you're on the line for that kind of a critical resource, to let a bunch of people who don't necessarily understand your domain as well as you do come in and tweak all the knobs. This is why I'm actually really excited about things like the approach we're taking to OpenStack. Because by exposing just essentially exactly what Neutron expects, and letting people come down and integrate to OpenDaylight, and having different providers under that the NetOps guys actually can manage, you as a NetOps guy can come in and say, okay, I've tested the hell out of this particular approach to feeding the OpenStack guys, and I'm willing to trust the knobs that I've given them are not going to take down my network. So that actually allows a much more peaceful sociological coexistence between 2 competing sets of needs that really both need to be satisfied. It really is important the network not go down. And it really is important that DevOps get increased agility. But you need to find a way to get those two domains to work together correctly. So there is some aspect of that sociology that's going on in some of the thinking behind OpenDaylight and the results that are coming out of it. Yes?
So, continuation to the question, and I may have missed this, but is there a report on the deployments? Is there anywhere that this has been deployed?
So there are already some commercial products that have been based on OpenDaylight that are out and being deployed. We are doing our first simultaneous release of OpenDaylight proper, December 9th, so that is the point at which you'll start to see deployments happening in the field.
Next summer,
Yeah, I mean, again, the release is December 9th. But again, as I said, there are commercial products that are currently deployed that have been based on the software. Yes?
You mentioned 2 more projects. Do you know, or do you want to talk about what they were?
I can speak to the proposals that have been made. So the first proposal is that is for, I think it's calling itself VIOPS at this point. They just changed the proposed name. And it's effectively a JavaScript-based modular user interface on top of OpenDaylight. And what's exciting about that is it is a set of JavaScript componentry that provides a consistent user interface, but any element of which you could take out and stick into another web page and have it still point to your controller and get that functionality. It's being based on AngularJS currently. So that's one of them. The other proposal that's coming in is for the integration project, where all the integration efforts and the pulling together of the release vehicles and the integration testing stuff will be with it. But we're very open to new projects. I think we had someone in the last session who was wanting to do some stuff with L7 database load balancing, and that would be awesome to see as well. Yes?
Yeah, question. So the first one is about the service provider edition. So does it include the carrier, like AT&T?
No, that's exactly what we mean when we talk about service providers, is carriers like AT&T, those sorts of folks, yes.
Okay, thank you. The second one is about the lease.
Yes.
Yes, so could you please share some detailed use case for lease?
So Lisp basically, and I'm not the Lisp project guy, they have a much more detailed understanding than I do. But they're looking at using Lisp, to my understanding, for service chaining for subscribers in service provider networks through various and sundry network functions. So that if you have a cellular subscriber or another network subscriber, you can actually move their particular traffic through the sets of services they're supposed to be receiving.
Thank
you. Yes?
Has there been any discussion on the cadence of releases, future releases?
There are no formal decisions on that. My sense is that we will probably be looking at a release every 6 months. So I would be unsurprised to see another release come summertime. If nothing else, one of the things that you have seen in other open source projects is a tendency to do a release in summertime as an act of self-defense on the part of the development team who would like to take some time off in the summer. And so you sort of push the release out and you hold your breath for a week or two to make sure it's all okay, and then you go take your vacation. Other questions? Thank you all.